The echo of love. 3 days after he died, his letter arrived. Chapter 1. The silence after the storm. Savannah, Georgia, 2024. The air in our old house, usually filled with the comfortable murmur of shared life, now hung heavy with an oppressive silence. 3 days. 3 days since Daniel, my Dan, my anchor, my rock, my beloved husband of 45 years, had simply stopped. A sudden heart attack, swift and merciless. One moment he was laughing, telling one of his ridiculous puns at the breakfast table. The next he was gone. Just like that. I was Nora Vance, though everyone called me Nora. At 68, I had always considered myself a practical woman, grounded in reality. Dan was the dreamer, the romantic, the one who saw magic in the mundane. I was the one who kept our feet on the ground, who managed the household, who ensured bills were paid and plans were made. He was my balance, my gentle counterpoint, the vibrant splash of color in my otherwise ordered life. His absence left a gaping, aching void, a wound so profound it seemed to steal the very air from my lungs. Our life together in Savannah had been a tapestry woven with simple joys. Mornings on the porch swing, sipping coffee, listening to the cicadas. Long walks through Forsyth Park, hand in hand. Quiet evenings, reading beside the crackling fireplace. We had raised our 2 wonderful children, Sarah and James, amidst the fragrant magnolia trees and the crumbling historic charm of this city. Dan was not just my husband. He was my confidant, my best friend, the keeper of my deepest thoughts and my silly private jokes. His death wasn't just a loss. It was an amputation of a part of my very soul. The funeral had been a blur of condolences, tearful hugs, and the quiet murmurs of grief. Our children, Sarah, 40, and James, 38, both so grown, so capable, had flown in immediately, their faces etched with the same disbelief and sorrow that gripped my own heart. They were strong, practical, like me, and they tried their best to comfort me, but there were no words that could soothe this kind of pain. On the 3rd day after the funeral, the house felt particularly empty. The scent of funeral lilies still lingered, cloying and heavy. I was drifting through the day in a haze of grief and numbness, mechanically going through the motions. The world outside seemed to continue its relentless turning, oblivious to the fact that my world had irrevocably shattered. I walked from room to room, touching his favorite armchair, running my hand over the spine of a book he had been reading, trying to grasp at the echoes of his presence. Then a soft rap on the front door. The mailman. A mundane interruption in my monumental grief. I collected the stack of envelopes, flyers, bills, junk mail. And then I saw it, tucked amongst the mundane, a single cream-colored envelope. My name, Nora Vance, scrolled across the front in a familiar, elegant hand. My heart leaped, then plunged. It was Dan's handwriting. Undeniably, unmistakably Dan's. A wave of dizziness washed over me. This was impossible. Dan was gone. He was buried beneath the sprawling oak trees in the Savannah cemetery. But the calligraphy, the distinctive loop of the E, the sharp angle of the V, it was his. My breath hitched. I flipped the envelope over. The postmark, a small suburban post office on the outskirts of Savannah, dated 2 days ago, the day before he died. My hands trembled so violently I almost dropped the letter. A frantic, desperate hope warred with a cold, rational dread. Was this some cruel joke? A mistake? But who would or could mimic Dan's unique script so perfectly? And the postmark, it was dated before his death. My pragmatic mind reeled, unable to reconcile the tangible evidence with the impossible reality. With shaking fingers, I tore open the seal. The paper inside was thick, cream-colored, the scent of his subtle cologne faintly clinging to it. The words, written in that same familiar hand, swam before my eyes. My dearest Nora, if you are reading this, then I have embarked on my final adventure, the one none of us can avoid. And my heart aches for the pain I know you are feeling right now. Please, my love, don't grieve for too long. Remember the laughter, the sunshine, the quiet moments that filled our lives. This is not the last you will hear from me, my darling. This is just the beginning. I've left you a series of letters, a final treasure hunt, if you will. They will arrive periodically, little whispers from beyond, designed to help you navigate this difficult path. Each letter will contain not just words of my enduring love, but also clues, riddles, references to our shared life, our journeys, the places we cherished. Think of it as my final gift, my way of staying with you, of guiding you through the darkness until you find your own light again. You were always my greatest adventure, Nora, my compass, and now I ask you to embark on one last adventure for me. Follow the clues, solve the riddles. It's my farewell, my love, my way of ensuring you keep living, keep exploring, keep remembering. The first clue awaits you at the end of this letter. Don't be afraid, my practical darling. Embrace the mystery just this once. All my love, eternally, Dan. I finished reading, tears streaming down my face, blurring the words. It was undeniably Dan. His voice, his humor, his profound, unwavering love infused every sentence. But a series of letters, a treasure hunt, my mind spun. He knew, he had known his time was short. He had planned this, for me, a tremor of something beyond grief, wonder, confusion, a hint of something almost spiritual ran through me. My practical world had just been irrevocably shattered, and in its place, a ghost of a puzzle had begun. Chapter 2. The first clue. A whispers from the past. The letter lay open on the kitchen table, a beacon of impossible reality amidst the mundane. Dan's familiar handwriting, his unique turn of phrase, the deeply personal jokes only we would understand. It was all undeniably him. My practical mind, usually so adept at logical deductions, reeled. How could this be? Dr. Carter, our family physician, had confirmed his death. The funeral was over. He was gone. Yet here was his voice, clear as day, speaking from beyond the veil of life. I picked up the phone, my fingers fumbling, and called Sarah. Her voice, usually so composed, was still thick with grief. "Mom, are you okay? You sound strange." "Sarah," I began, my voice trembling. I just got a letter from your father." A beat of silence, then a hesitant, "Mom, honey, are you sure? Maybe it's an old one? One he wrote before everything?" "No," I insisted, my voice rising in urgency. "It's postmarked 2 days ago. The day before he died, and he says it's the first of many, a series of letters, a treasure hunt." I heard her sigh, a mix of concern and a gentle attempt at rationalization. "Mom, darling, I know you're grieving. It's a natural part of the process. Maybe Dad had these written out, scheduled to be sent years ago, or perhaps someone found old letters and thought they were new." "No," I repeated, firmer this time. "This isn't old. He talks about his final adventure. He mentions things only we would know, and he signed it, 'All my love, eternally, Dan.' It's him, Sarah. It's him." I tried to convey the chilling certainty I felt, the impossible truth of it. Sarah remained skeptical, as did James when I called him. They both loved their father deeply, but they were practical, analytical. It must be some incredibly elaborate posthumous plan, James suggested, trying to provide comfort through logic. Dad was always sentimental, Mom. Maybe he prepared these knowing he was ill, or just as a gesture for when he eventually passed. He was always full of surprises. But I knew Dan. He hadn't been ill. His death was sudden. There was no long illness, no slow decline that would have allowed for such elaborate planning. The end of the letter contained the first riddle, written in a separate paragraph, with a flourish that was uniquely Dan. And now, my dear, the first clue. Look for it where our story began, where the seagulls sang of first love and ancient oaks whispered secrets. The past holds the key, and a certain old lamp might just show you the way home. I reread the clue. Where our story began, where the seagulls sang, my mind immediately went to Charleston, South Carolina. Our city, where we met at a college mixer. 2 shy students, one practical, one a dreamer, destined to collide. Where we fell in love, walking along the Battery, the seagulls crying overhead. The ancient oaks, heavy with Spanish moss, were synonymous with Charleston. And a certain old lamp? That stumped me. My pragmatic nature rebelled. This was ridiculous. Chasing clues from a dead man? It felt like something out of a Gothic novel, not my perfectly ordered life. But then I looked at Dan's signature again. The love, the tenderness, the raw, aching grief in my heart argued with my head. What if this was his way, his final, loving gesture? I sought out Mrs. Agnes Lanier, my neighbor, a woman years my senior, whose porch light often burned late into the night. Agnes was a gentle soul, with eyes that saw more than just the surface. She believed in signs, in the whispers of the universe, in a spiritual world beyond our comprehension. She listened patiently as I, voice trembling, explained about the letter. Agnes's eyes twinkled. "Oh, Nora, darling," she said, her voice soft and knowing. Dan was always full of surprises, and a romantic to boot. Of course he'd find a way. This isn't morbid, my dear. This is love reaching across the veil. You must follow him. He's showing you the way, just as he always did. Her unwavering belief, so contrary to my own nature, was strangely comforting. She gently encouraged me, suggesting that embracing this adventure might be the only way to truly process my grief. He's not asking you to forget him, Nora. He's asking you to remember him fully, vibrantly, to truly live even after he's gone. Her words, coupled with my own desperate need for connection, for any tangible link to Dan, finally swayed me. I called Sarah. "I'm going to Charleston," I told her, my voice firm, "to find the next letter." Sarah, ever the pragmatist, was immediately concerned. "Mom, are you sure you should be traveling alone right now? You're still grieving. Maybe you should wait." "I'm not waiting," I insisted, "and I'm not going alone. You're coming with me." I could hear her sigh through the phone, but I also heard the underlying thread of worry and love. She agreed. She'd come, not because she believed in the letters, but because she believed in me, and she needed to ensure I was coping. The drive to Charleston, usually a pleasant 4-hour journey, felt heavy with unspoken emotion. Sarah, driving, cast worried glances my way. I held Dan's first letter, rereading his words, trying to find reassurance in their familiar cadence. We arrived in Charleston, the city of cobblestone streets and horse-drawn carriages, a living postcard of our youth. We started our search in the Battery Park, where Dan and I had spent countless afternoons as young lovers, planning our future, dreaming our dreams. The seagulls cried overhead, just as they had then. The ancient oak trees, draped in Spanish moss, stood as silent sentinels of our past. I walked slowly, eyes scanning, searching for something, anything related to a certain old lamp. We visited the places we frequented, the market where we bought cheap trinkets, the historic homes where we imagined our future. No lamps. Mom, Sarah said gently, are you sure this isn't just a coping mechanism? Maybe Dad just wanted you to remember these places, not to actually find something. I shook my head. No. Dan wouldn't make a riddle without an answer. He loved his puzzles too much. Then a sudden memory sparked. Our favorite coffee shop. A small, cozy place with mismatched furniture and the best pecan tarts in Charleston. It was there, on our third date, that Dan had playfully pointed to a quirky antique lamp, shaped like a lighthouse in the corner, and declared, "That, Nora, is the lamp of our destiny. It lights our path, always." It had become a running joke between us, a small, intimate symbol of our budding love. "The coffee shop," I exclaimed, a surge of adrenaline pushing away my grief for a moment. "The lighthouse lamp." Sarah, still skeptical but intrigued by my sudden burst of energy, followed me. The coffee shop was still there, older, perhaps a bit more worn, but the scent of roasted coffee beans and sweet pastries was exactly as I remembered. And in the very same corner, on a small round table, sat the antique lighthouse lamp, dusty but unmistakable. My heart hammered. This was it. I approached the table, my hand trembling, and reached for the base of the lamp. Tucked beneath its worn metal base, secured with a piece of old masking tape, was a small, cream-colored envelope. Another letter. Dan. Sarah gasped, her jaw dropping. Her skepticism, for the first time, seemed to waver. She watched wide-eyed as I carefully, reverently, pulled out the letter. His distinctive handwriting, once again, confirmed the impossible. He was reaching out, and I, his practical Nora, was beginning to follow his ghostly trail. My journey, it seemed, had just truly begun. Chapter 3, Starlight and Secrets. The second letter, found beneath the whimsical lighthouse lamp in that charming Charleston coffee shop, felt heavier, more substantial than the first. It wasn't just paper. It was a tangible connection, a warm breath from the impossible. Sarah, standing beside me, looked utterly speechless, her pragmatic worldview momentarily suspended. He knew you'd find it," she whispered, her voice laced with awe. "He planned this." I nodded, my fingers tracing Dan's elegant script on the envelope. My tears now were a mixture of sorrow and a strange, profound gratitude. He hadn't just left me, he had left me a path, a map through my grief. We found a quiet table in the coffee shop, the scent of fresh pastries filling the air, a stark contrast to the unfolding mystery. I carefully opened the second letter. "My dearest Nora, my intrepid explorer, I knew you'd find this. You always were the best at solving my riddles, even when you pretended otherwise. Charleston, our beginning. It brings a smile to my face, just imagining you there, perhaps with Sarah, reliving our foolish youth. Remember that ridiculous serenade I attempted under your dorm window? Or the time we got gloriously lost trying to find the best peach cobbler? Those memories, my love. They are the true treasures. Hold on to them. I see you, Nora. I see you taking these steps, and it warms my heart. You were always my greatest adventure, the most beautiful journey I ever embarked upon. We explored so many places together, didn't we? From the cobblestone streets of Savannah to the bustling markets of Marrakesh. But the most precious journeys were always the ones we shared, hand in hand, through life itself. Now, for your next clue, my starlight. Think of where our dreams of the heavens first bloomed, where the stars felt closer than ever before, and the universe whispered its secrets to us. Seek it there, where light meets darkness, and the past conceals something more than it seems. Look for the faint hum of old machinery. Always and forever, your Dan. My breath hitched. My starlight. He had called me that, only me. a private endearment from a night under the Perseid meteor shower years ago. And dreams of the heavens, stars felt closer, light meets darkness, old machinery. It immediately transported me to our anniversary trip years ago to an old observatory nestled deep in the mountains of North Carolina. We had spent a magical night there, gazing through powerful telescopes, learning about distant galaxies, feeling utterly insignificant and yet profoundly connected to the vastness of the cosmos. Dan, ever the romantic, had held me close, whispering about how our love was as infinite as the stars. North Carolina, I murmured, my mind already racing. The old observatory. Remember, Sarah, for our 25th anniversary? Sarah, still processing the sheer impossibility of the letter she had just witnessed, looked startled. The observatory? Mom, are you serious? You think he left another letter there? He always leaves clues, I stated, a newfound certainty in my voice, and he's never been wrong. My practical nature was still there, but it was now overlaid with a layer of wonder, a willingness to believe in the impossible. Sarah, though still reeling, recognized the shift in me. My grief, while still present, was no longer paralyzing. It was being channeled, transformed by this mysterious quest. All right, Mom, she conceded, a hesitant smile touching her lips. North Carolina it is, but I'm driving. The drive from Charleston to the North Carolina mountains was breathtaking. The landscape changing from coastal plains to rolling hills, then majestic peaks cloaked in ancient forests. The crisp mountain air, the winding roads, it felt like a physical journey into a deeper past, a grander purpose. At the observatory, nestled atop a lonely peak, the silence was profound, broken only by the whisper of the wind through the pines. The building itself was old, its dome a rusted sentinel against the sky. Inside, the ancient telescope stood, a relic of scientific ambition, its heavy machinery humming faintly, just as Dan's clue had suggested. I walked slowly through the quiet building, my hand brushing against cold metal, my eyes scanning every nook and cranny. Sarah followed, her skepticism battling with a growing sense of awe. She watched me, her mother, who just days ago had been a shell of grief, now vibrant with purpose. Beneath a dusty control panel, almost hidden from view, lay another cream-colored envelope. I reached for it, my fingers trembling. The familiarity of Dan's hand, the faint scent of his cologne, it was like a ghostly embrace. This letter was different. It began with the same warmth, the same playful acknowledgement of my detective skills, but a new, more serious tone emerged. My beloved Nora, you found it. Of course you did. The stars, my darling, they always reminded me of you, infinite, beautiful, and full of hidden wonders. Do you remember how we talked about building a small observatory in our backyard one day? Another dream, perhaps unfulfilled in this life, but I like to think we're gazing at the same stars now, just from different vantage points. I'm writing this a few weeks before I leave. The doctors gave me some news. Not good news, my love. I chose not to tell you. I couldn't bear to see that beautiful light in your eyes dimmed by sorrow before its time. I wanted our last days to be filled with laughter, with normalcies, with the joy we always shared. Forgive me, my love, for this deception. It was born of the deepest love I possess. This treasure hunt, as I've called it, it's my way of being there for you, of helping you through the initial, crushing waves of grief. I've known for a while that my time was limited, and I couldn't bear the thought of you facing this silence alone. So I prepared. I planned. Every clue, every memory. is a thread from our tapestry, woven to help you remember the richness of our life and to slowly, gently guide you back to your own strength. There is a small surprise awaiting you, my darling. Something I've been working on for a while. It's a project, a collection of sorts that I hope will bring you comfort and perhaps a little understanding. The next clue will lead you to it. Think of our shared adventures, the places that brought us joy, the unique trinkets we collected along the way. The next step is where the ocean whispers ancient tales and a guiding light shines eternal. Look for the keeper of the waves and a tiny carved bird. Forever your guiding star, Dan. My hands shook as I folded the letter. He knew. He had known he was dying. He had planned this meticulously, secretly, all to protect me, to guide me. The tears flowed freely now. Tears not just of grief, but of profound admiration and a love that transcended understanding. My practical Dan, full of surprises, even in death. He had orchestrated this entire, impossible, heartbreaking, yet utterly beautiful farewell. Sarah, who had been reading over my shoulder, gasped. He was sick, and he didn't tell us? Oh, Dad! Her own tears began to fall, a mix of sorrow and a new, aching respect for her father's selfless choice. The journey continued, fueled by a mixture of purpose and sorrow. The letters kept coming, each one a lifeline, a tangible piece of Anne's presence. One led us to a charming lighthouse on the Outer Banks of North Carolina, where we had spent a storm-tossed week, laughing at the wind's ferocity. There, tucked inside a replica of the lighthouse, was the next letter, asking me to find a place where history whispers through cobblestones and forgotten melodies drift on humid air. This clue took me to a vibrant jazz club in the French Quarter of New Orleans, where Dan and I had celebrated a particularly wild New Year's Eve. Beneath a worn, velvet-covered table, I found the next missive. Each letter was a journey into our past. The small antique shop in New Orleans, where we'd bought a carved wooden bird that Dan had insisted was a good luck charm. A dusty old bookstore in Asheville, North Carolina, where he'd bought me a rare first edition of my favorite novel. Even my childhood home in a tiny town in rural Georgia, where Dan had, with endless patience, helped me restore my grandmother's forgotten rose garden. With each discovery, my grief, though still potent, began to transform. It was no longer a suffocating blanket, but a tapestry, interwoven with memories, laughter, and the undeniable sense of Dan's continued presence. I wasn't just mourning his absence, I was actively celebrating his life, rediscovering the depth of our connection, and uncovering the strength he had always seen in me. He wasn't gone. He was simply guiding me from a different vantage point. My children, seeing the profound change in me, gradually shed their skepticism. They witnessed my transformation, my newfound purpose. Sarah, initially concerned for my sanity, became my dedicated travel companion, her eyes widening with each discovered letter, each seemingly impossible clue solved. James, my analytical son, even used his tech skills to help decipher one particularly tricky clue involving a geocache Dan had hidden years ago. They didn't fully understand how the letters kept arriving, but they could no longer deny their profound impact. They, too, found comfort in their father's extraordinary farewell, a final, loving connection to a man they adored. The final letter, nestled within the antique wooden bird from New Orleans, brought me full circle, back to Savannah. It was shorter, more poignant. Dan wrote that I had solved all his riddles, that I was strong, that he would always be with me. He told me that the final key, the biggest surprise, was waiting for me in our home, in the place that had always symbolized our peace, our shared memories. My practical Nora, you've embraced the mystery. Now the final unveiling. Look for it, where old stories intertwine with new ones, where your heart always found its deepest comfort. Our home, my love, our sanctuary, and a quiet corner where I often dreamed of you. The last adventure was about to reveal its true culmination. Chapter 5. The Unveiling. Back in our Savannah home, the air still carried the faint scent of magnolias and now the lingering presence of Dan's meticulous planning. The final letter, still clutched in my hand, directed me to where old stories intertwine with new ones, where your heart always found its deepest comfort. My mind immediately went to his study, the room filled with his beloved books, his worn leather armchair, and the scent of pipe tobacco and old paper. It was his sanctuary, but also a place where we had shared countless quiet evenings, reading side by side. I walked into the study, the polished wood reflecting the afternoon light. It was just as he'd left it, his spectacles on his desk, an open book face down, as if he'd just stepped away for a moment. My heart ached, but the ache was now intertwined with a profound curiosity, a sense of purpose. Where old stories intertwine with new ones, I murmured, scanning the rows of books. Dan loved history, biographies, and classic literature. Where your heart always found its deepest comfort. This was a personal clue. My heart always found comfort when I was with him, in his presence, in his quiet corner of the house. My gaze settled on his favorite reading spot, a worn, overstuffed armchair by the large bay window. This was where he spent his evenings, a cup of tea on the small side table, a book in hand, often watching the sunset over the garden. It was his spot, but it was also our spot, the place where we shared comfortable silences, where he'd often reach for my hand, never needing words. I approached the armchair, running my hand over the familiar worn fabric. It smelled faintly of him. I remembered how he loved to lean back, his head resting against the armrest, lost in thought. A sudden inspiration struck. Dan, always clever with small hidden spaces, had once made a secret compartment in an old desk. I ran my fingers along the wooden frame of the armchair, feeling for any unusual seams or hidden latches. And there it was, underneath the right armrest, where his hand would have often rested, was a tiny, almost invisible button. I pressed it. With a soft click, a small, shallow compartment slid open from the side of the armrest, perfectly integrated into the wood. My breath hitched. Inside, nestled on a bed of dark velvet, were two items. A thick, leather-bound journal, much larger than Maggie's, its cover embossed with a single, elegant D, and next to it, a sleek, modern USB drive. My hands trembled as I took them out. The journal was heavy, its pages filled with Dan's distinctive script. The title, etched in gold leaf on the cover, sent a fresh wave of tears to my eyes. Our Untold Adventure, a Guide for Nora. I opened it, and his words, vibrant and immediate, leapt from the page. My beloved Nora, my courageous adventurer. If you are reading this, then you have followed my last labyrinthine trail. You have proven yourself to be the strong, resilient woman I always knew you were, even when you doubted it. You have embarked on this journey, not just for me, but for yourself, and for that, my heart swells with pride. This journal, my love, is my final confession, my last act of devotion. I discovered my illness a year ago, a cruel, relentless opponent that chose to remain silent until it was too late. I chose not to tell you, my light. I wanted our remaining time to be unclouded by sorrow, unburdened by fear. I wanted to protect your beautiful heart from pain for as long as possible. Forgive me, again, for this silence. It was the hardest choice I ever made. Knowing my time was limited, I began to plan this quest. I poured my heart and soul into every clue, every memory, every destination. I wanted to help you grieve, yes, but more importantly, I wanted to help you remember the richness of our life, the depth of our love, and to guide you gently back to your own strength. This journal holds my thoughts, my reflections, my unsent goodbyes. It is a record of our love, from my perspective, a map of my heart for you. And the USB drive, that, my darling, is for your eyes only. It's a collection of my final whispers, moments I recorded for you, for Sarah, for James. My voice, my face, a final tangible connection. There is one more person you should seek out, my dear. A dear old friend who helped me with this grand deception. Her name is Martha. She lives in Charleston, near our old haunts. I've entrusted her with some final wishes and the means to ensure these letters found their way to you exactly when they were meant to. She can tell you anything you still need to know. She's a good soul, and she'll understand. My adventure ends here, my Nora, but yours continues. Live fully, love deeply, and know that I am always with you in every sunrise, every whispered secret, every beat of your courageous heart. Eternally, your Dan. I couldn't breathe. He knew. He had fought this battle alone, silently, to spare me. The sheer depth of his love, his incredible foresight, his heartbreaking selflessness, it was overwhelming. I felt a surge of anguish, but also an immense, profound gratitude. He hadn't just died. He had meticulously choreographed his final act, a symphony of love designed to heal my broken heart. My children, Sarah and James, arrived shortly after, drawn by the silence that had fallen over the house, different from the silence of grief, a silence of immense revelation. I could only point to the journal and the USB drive. They sat beside me, their faces pale, as I explained. With trembling hands, James inserted the USB drive into his laptop. The screen flickered to life. And there he was, Dan. His face a little thinner, perhaps, but his eyes still held that familiar twinkle, that gentle warmth. He spoke to us, personally, his voice clear, his smile unwavering. There were separate videos for me, for Sarah, for James. He joked, he reminisced, he offered advice. He told us how much he loved us, how proud he was. In one video, he looked directly at me, his eyes brimming. Nora, my love, don't stop living. Don't let my departure dim your light. Live for us both. Find joy, find peace, and know that I will always be with you in every Savannah sunset, in every memory we built. Sarah and James openly wept, their faces streaked with tears. Yet there was a glimmer of something else, a shared sense of closure, of a final, cherished goodbye they hadn't had at the funeral. This was their father, alive and speaking to them, reaching out from beyond. It was a profound, bittersweet gift. The next day, I called Martha. She was an elderly woman in Charleston, a lifelong friend of Dan's whom I had only vaguely known through occasional mentions. Her voice was kind, gentle. She confirmed everything. Dan had visited her months ago, explaining his terminal diagnosis. He had entrusted her with all the letters, the USB drive, and precise instructions on when and where to send each one, meticulously planning the timing so they would arrive at specific junctures of my grief. He had even made a few false leads, he told her, chuckling, to make the mystery more engaging for his practical Nora. Martha even had a final, personal letter from Dan, thanking her for her discretion and her unwavering friendship, along with documents for a significant charitable donation to an animal shelter I had always supported. He truly thought of everything. Chapter 6, A Love That Transcends. The unveiling of Dan's profound secret had transformed my grief. It hadn't erased the pain. No, that would always be a part of me, a testament to the depth of our love. But it had stripped away the bitterness, the raw emptiness, and replaced it with an overwhelming sense of wonder, gratitude, and a love that felt even grander than before. I understood now that his love wasn't confined to life. It stretched beyond, a guiding hand from the great unknown. I spent hours poring over Our Untold Adventure, a guide for Nora. Each entry was a revelation. He wrote about our first meeting from his perspective, the moment he first saw me across a crowded college mixer. How my quiet practicality had captivated his romantic heart. He recounted adventures I had almost forgotten, small moments that he had treasured, proving that love truly was in the details. He documented his secret battle with his illness, his struggle to maintain a normal facade, his desperate desire to protect me from the pain. He even included sketches he'd made of me throughout our lives, me laughing, reading, working in the garden, little artistic glimpses into his deepest affections. The video messages on the USB drive became my nightly ritual. His voice, his smile, his familiar quirks, they were alive, tangible. He would tease me, offer comforting words, or simply gaze into the camera with that profound love that always melted my heart. It was a lifeline, a conversation across the divide, ensuring I was never truly alone. When the grief felt overwhelming, I would watch his videos, and his presence would fill the room, soothing my aching soul. My inherent pragmatism, once a fortress against the unknown, had softened. I found myself more open to the subtle whispers of the world, to the signs Mrs. Lanier often spoke of. When a butterfly fluttered close to me in the garden, I no longer dismissed it as a coincidence. I allowed myself to believe it was Dan, sending a gentle reminder. Mrs. Lanier, of course, was delighted. "I told you, Nora," she'd say, her eyes twinkling. "Love finds a way, even beyond the stars." My children, Sarah and James, found their own solace in their father's extraordinary gift. They too watched his videos, their grief gradually transforming into a deep appreciation for the man he was, for his incredible foresight and selfless love. James, my analytical son, was particularly moved by his father's meticulous planning, marveling at the complexity of the quest. Sarah, who had journeyed with me to find the letters, felt a renewed connection to her father, understanding his choices with a depth she couldn't have achieved before. The experience, while born of sorrow, had undeniably brought our family closer, binding us together with the enduring legacy of Dan's love. I found myself returning to the things Dan loved. I started sketching again, a hobby I'd abandoned years ago, inspired by Maggie's artistry and Dan's appreciation for beauty. I spent more time in the garden, nurturing the flowers he loved. I even started picking up his old habit of telling bad puns, finding a quiet joy in the shared humor. My life, which had felt empty and directionless, now brimmed with purpose, imbued with his spirit. I began writing my own journal, a companion to Dan's, our untold adventure. It was my way of continuing the dialogue with him, of processing my thoughts, my memories, my healing. I wrote to him about my day, about the new connections I was making, about how much I missed him, but also how grateful I was for his wisdom. I realized that our story hadn't ended with his death. It had simply taken on a new, more profound form. One particularly sunny afternoon, months after the last letter had arrived, I sat in Dan's favorite armchair, the one with the secret compartment, overlooking our garden. His journal lay open on my lap, his face smiling at me from a small framed photograph on the side table. The silence in the house was no longer oppressive. It was peaceful, filled with the warmth of his presence. I closed my eyes, remembering his laugh, the feel of his hand in mine, the way he would always know just what to say. The grief was still there, a soft ache, but it was now entwined with an overwhelming sense of peace and enduring love. Dan, my romantic, my enigma, my guiding light, my husband, was still with me. He had taught me the most important adventure of all, how to truly live, not just exist, after loss, by carrying his love, his spirit, and his wisdom within my heart, forever.